This week, Emmet and Kumar review Chantal Montellier's Social Fiction, published by New York Review Comics with a translation by Geoffrey Brock. It's a collection of comics fueled by political anger, hauntingly farsighted satire, and attacks on consumer culture. The book collects some works that were originally published in French in the 70s and 80s, but were retranslated to English for this new edition. We hope you'll spread the word about Deconstructing Comics, tell your friends about us, share episodes on social media, and also send us suggestions for topics we could cover. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com.
This is Emmet.
And this is Kumar.
This is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Emmet and Kumar in the state of Victoria.
Yes, indeed.
It's the Victoria boys. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about Social Fiction, which is a collection of individual works by Chantal Montellier, translated by Geoffrey Brock, who I just learned is a poet, which is interesting because I was going to pick your brains in some of the lettering choices.
Okay.
Are the translations in this, but it's a translation from the French to English, and Montellier is somebody who is associated with, well, pardon the pun, les humanoids associés, Maître Larlan, and I think she is mentioned frequently in relation to Nana.
Yes.
Which was a comic magazine, bande dessinée, that only lasted for 9 issues because it dared to treat of women's bodies and was more or less pressured to shut down from accusations of pornography, despite the fact that it was doing no such thing. So, fascinating career. Still
working in Maître Larlan, apparently.
Yeah, she's had a resurgence of interest in the English-speaking world, particularly since the recent publication of Social Fiction.
Yeah, this is from New York Review Comics, so it's this is a very exclusive club, and it's a very, this is fancy pants publishing here. This is like top shelf kind of stuff. I'd never heard of her at all before getting this book. I'd read the reviews, and I was okay, I'll pick this up, and that was it. And so the only context I have for her work is the introduction by the translator, which is 2 pages at the beginning, and the 3 or 4 page interview at the back.
Yeah, interesting. And I think it's only fair to tip the hat to the Comic Books Are Burning in Hell podcast, who did publish a rave review of Social Fiction, and it was more or less a case of, hey, get your Chantal Montellier now, folks. This is it. This is the opportunity.
Yeah.
It is funny looking at her work, because I think she's frequently, as an artist, described as being photorealist. And I was looking through it, and that maybe is because of the Maître Larlan connection. But I kept, or les humanoids, I kept seeing traces of Mobius as well, particularly with Blancal, where you have the slightly cartoonish but still well-lined faces, like the simple, clean line.
The ligne claire, as the French call it. Yeah.
And it's in effect here too. And I think photorealist is maybe not, it doesn't encapsulate some of the whimsy that's also, and some of the fluidity that's here too. And I think that's not only reflection of her choice of style, but also her choice of political engagement. It's one of those deadening phrases, when you have a woman cartoonist described as, well, she's a feminist cartoonist, and I feel like a section of a certain type of listener just shuts down at that point. But if you're talking about science fiction, And if you're talking about speculation as to what the future is bringing to us, and usually it is a person commenting on something that's actually happening in their life right now, the emphasis on women's bodies is fruitful.
Yeah.
Again, pardon the pun, in terms of what stories you can tell, and that's a running theme through a lot of these.
Yeah, there's a lot. You can't not use the word feminist. It's very much about that. Apparently, so one of the stories we get in here, Wonder City,
Yes.
started serialization in the same issue of Metal Hurlant as The Long Tomorrow by Mobius and Bannon. So this is what was in the air, is that dirty future, the opposite of the science fiction with the clean, bright, shining cities of the 50s. So it was the movement against that. So apparently some of this stuff was translated in heavy metal in the first issue, like from the first issue of the English heavy metal. Ran for 2 years. Apparently the translation was very weird and terrible, and that's detailed in the introduction and interview in this. I haven't seen those. And then her next series... 1996 was serialized, which is a series of shorts. Some of them are only one page.
And then there's a longer form story in it.
Yeah, and Shelter got canceled before it was completed, and she seems to think it was because it had kind of Marxist... The editors of Heavy Metal were scared of the Marxist bent. I believe that Heavy Metal changed editors, and the new editor just immediately canceled it. So... it's probably, maybe he was actually scared of the Marxist suggestions of it, which don't really follow through in the end.
It is interesting to read these stories and see how often they are set in the States.
Yes.
And how often they are concerned with America. And if you want to talk about the dirty future versus the hopeful utopia, the technocracy that's hopeful, which is a feature of American science fiction, in particular, particularly around the time of the pulps, you see in Montellier a sort of encapsulation of the future that's coming, the future that's arriving, which is one of waste. It's one of waste, and it's one of abuse. Abuse of power, particularly where...
Social sadism is the term she uses, which I thought was really perfect.
That's perfect encapsulation, But it's particularly in relation to race and gender.
Yeah.
Those are the two things that are going to be captured, deconstructed, and monetized as much as possible. And it's hard not to disagree with that analysis. But the fact that she sort of cites that in America, I think, is really interesting. And I wonder if some of that sensitivity on the part of whatever editorial voices were taking umbrage is because they knew this is going to piss off some Yanks. This is less commercially viable. I think there's a degree of sexism involved there too, obviously, but I wonder if, Metal Hurlant becomes heavy metal, is this big hit in the States because there's tits in it.
Yeah.
And I can see them saying, well, no, she doesn't fit. Like Jodorowsky will go on these little spiritual investigations in his books, but he'll also have lots of sex and rape. And that's what they know will sell to a certain reader. Yeah. So I can see Montellier being sort of...
The nudity and sex in this book, through all the different stories, is very different. The nudity is very non-sexual. When it occurs, or sometimes when it does occur, it's because these women have been deliberately stripped. In one case, it's this woman trying to sell car parts, and she's wearing almost nothing.
She's indistinguishable from a model, and what we later learn are corpses.
Yes,
but her body is simply a fact. Her nakedness is simply, or near nakedness, is simply there to aid in the sale of a product.
Yeah.
There is nothing sexual about it.
Yeah. But she's throwing her hips out, the way she draws her in a way that she's trying to sell to the customers, that the character's trying to sell to the patrons of this car yard. But anyway, we'll get to all of that. So let's maybe go through them. So there's two big stories in here. The first one is Wonder City. And this one is set in a future...
It's the city again.
It opens with this poster of like a couple from looks like the 30s or the 20s, and they're talking about how much they love Wonder City, but in the foreground, it's been vandalized completely, and in the foreground you see a cop beating someone. So immediately we know we're in a police state of some sort. And it's done again, as we mentioned, in that clear line style. There's a single color, which is pink throughout. Some of these stories have been revised sometimes more than once over the years. Apparently this coloring was not the original coloring, but was done for this edition in 2003. People are going around wearing badges that say, "I love Wonder City." And then we meet this character who's deciphering genetic codes. And his name is Freddie. Yeah. And him and his coworker know that this is not, something's going on with this state. Like, why are they doing this? This isn't good. We probably shouldn't be doing this. Maybe it's okay. They're not really sure. They're kind of hedging their bets about it. Fred meets this girl named Angie. Yep, she's a trumpet player.
Yeah, she's a musician. Yeah.
Yes.
She's a performer. And
he kind of saves her from an altercation in a bar where some people are trying to force her to play for their entertainment. And so she invites him to a gig. They end up dating. They end up getting married. Interesting thing I found in this book was there are a lot of supportive, functional male-female relationships, which I feel like is rare in comics by women that we've read in the last 20 years. Well, maybe this is 40 years old, this stuff, but...
Well, it's actually, I would make that a wider statement. I think it's rare in a lot of speculative fiction.
Yes.
Because there's usually an emphasis on the individual struggle. Whereas I think in a lot of these stories, where there are any moments of hope, it's usually, centered on a relationship.
Yes.
Be it a close friendship or a sexual relationship. But that's usually where any sort of revolutionary potential starts.
Yeah. There's a kind of threat of nuclear war happening in the background. We hear over news reports or whatever. But now we learn that, so this couple, now that they've married, they want to have a baby. But every new birth, we're told, requires prior approval from the Institute of Demographic Control to ensure the rationality of births. And we're not quite sure what this is, but we slowly learn that all births are done, everything's done in a lab. So it seems like it's done in vitro, but they remove the egg. It seems like they put the sperm in by the computer's choice. It's not chosen by
we should also note, for the sake of the listener, that the computer and this whole system and this process is represented by a friendly father-like doctor character who's present in all sorts of publicity and billboards and is constantly reassuring you that everything will be fine.
Yeah, they have these corner booths where you go in every 6 months to get your birth control shot.
Yeah, don't, spoilers.
Yeah. So you go in for a birth control shot every 6 months or whatever. But then when you do want to have a baby, they take your egg, they put a sperm in that's not your choice. It seems like they've mathematically chosen the best donor, and then it's grown, and the fetus is grown in a vat, and you don't have anything to do with it. The whole thing's done in labs. So Angie decides they're gonna have a baby. Angie goes in, but she's rejected. Now, she had been pregnant in the past. So they don't know how. They say what happened? They say she's sterile.
Yeah.
And she's like, how can that be? I have been pregnant in the past. It's impossible. And then she has this long nightmare, which is
incredible. Yeah. Incredible sequence.
Where we see how the babies are grown in vats and stuff, actually. And one of the babies the fetus speaks to her and says, I want to get out of this gross artificial amniotic fluid. And it smashes its way out, and the whole facility is flooded with this artificial amniotic fluid. She wakes up from her nightmare.
Oh, sorry. It is an incredible moment. It's an incredible page. Like, everyone's drowning in this amniotic fluid that's, being contained in all these little baby cells, and the babies have revolted and they've punched their way through the glass, and all the fluid's like spurted out, and people are drowning. Things are being knocked over, and this sort of talking cat who keeps appearing to Angie, and is a sort of like spectral presence in both her dream life and her waking life, sort of appears and is sort of, you can see, it's just sort of watching it all unfold.
Yes.
That's what I meant by whimsy. Sometimes these moments are just little details I thought were quite lovely.
Yes. So we also get a speech from the director of the Institute here, which is, during the dream, which is important, where he says, as you can observe, in the not too distant past, human beings were still viviparous. One must acknowledge that it's quite revolting, the infant emerging from the depths of its mother's entrails, born in blood and suffering. The female body was quickly rendered ugly and disfigured by repeated anarchic pregnancies. Fertilization was haphazard, a function of each person's desires and whims, especially, it must be said, each woman's. Yes, that's how it was. Gestation was first and foremost a woman's business. Unfortunately, much has changed. These days, thanks to in vitro fertilization and all the new gestational technologies, gestation is everybody's business.
Yeah.
Now, this comes up again in the next story as well, Shelter, in a slightly different form. But I find it interesting that nowadays when we hear about reproductive rights, it's all about abortion. And in these stories, it's all about the women wanting to have babies and the government taking that away from them or regulating it severely.
I think it's only fair to say that it's the same debate.
Yes, of course it is. Yeah.
The abortion debate is the debate around choice, and the dream sequence itself is about her bodily choice being removed from her entire gender.
Yes, but I'm saying in that discussion, we almost never hear this end of it, where I want to have my baby at this stage in my life in this way or whatever. It's not. Well, I guess it's not in the media discussion of it.
No, it's a frustrating and thwarted discussion because that's essentially what it is about.
Yes.
But that is not how it's termed. It's termed the abortion debate.
Yes.
It's termed dead babies,
Yeah.
and not when a woman chooses to have the child.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think that's exactly what she's bringing to the fore here, because abortion itself had just been made legal in the 70s in France. So that's actually very present on her mind. And a lot of her work is sort of centered on this idea of generation and again, race, because it comes back to that idea of control. So yes, I can see where you're coming from there, but I think it's just important to highlight that this is exactly what it's about.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so now we learn a bit about her background as she tells her husband about this. She tells Fred about it. We learn that her mother was from Puerto Rico, and she died of an overdose of some sort. And then we learn that she was incarcerated in a prison called Thatcher Prison after a demonstration.
Yep.
So she begs her husband to investigate this. He doesn't really have the clearance to dig into her medical background, but he's kind of able to fudge his way in with his fake ID or something like that. And he finds out that all the lower classes, when they go in for their birth control, are getting sterilized. And it seems to be happening to non-whites as well. So she goes berserk. She decides she's going to trash one of these hologram booths with the Nimbus doctor, the friendly doctor that gives you your shot. Everyone around her, it's interesting. This is another interesting thing in all these stories is the population is like, what are you doing? We love the doctor. Why are you trashing this thing? What's wrong with you? And then security's called in. People are against her vandalizing this booth. And then so finally she cuts her hair and she runs off with her husband. They go into the Forbidden Zone, which is maybe the zone at the start of the story, which was locked down due to some sort of epidemic. I'm not sure.
Which has maybe been invented.
Yeah. That was supposed to be Eastern District. They go through something called South Exit, so I'm not quite sure. Anyway, and then their future is uncertain, but they're outside of the control of the computer life.
2 quick points. The suggestion is that Fred will raise a child that they will have to become a hacker like him. And is instructing in him that sort of insight into how to break through the system. Also, just before they manage to escape, we witness during the crackdown women who happen to be darker and have dark hair are being just brutally targeted by the police force. So they're just indiscriminately now using the pretext of Angie's revolt to just crack down on all these women. So I think that's just important to mention as well. It's about her race. It comes back again in the and then so fast in their shiny metal cars. That idea of the surprise reveal of a passing non-white person. You know, that is something that keeps coming up, and it relates to this idea of racial purity. But the other thing I really loved is when they escape, there is a car chase, and it goes badly wrong. And I don't have the page in front of me right now, but I love Angie's line, which she's just going, "Oh, they're such incompetents."
Yes, that's right.
It's so useless.
Utter ineptitude, she says.
Utter ineptitude. Utter ineptitude. Because that's really important too. They have total control.
Yes.
And they are wasting it.
Yes.
They have total power, and they are doing nothing.
That comes up again and again in these stories, in various stories. Sometimes in 1 or 2 page stories, you have a police state, but the police are inept in some way. Yeah.
It's waste. It keeps coming back to waste.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you make of this story? Did you like this one? I
friggin' loved it.
Yeah. I did like it too. I do wonder some of these stories are familiar. I definitely think it's a new slant or a new bent. There are angles here that I haven't seen in this kind of police state story before. I think something else that comes up here, and it's good that you mentioned the thing about other people are being attacked based on their race because of her vandalism, is sometimes people rebel and there are negative consequences.
Sure.
When that's a thing that kind of comes up again and again. And I think it's like I think Chantal Montellier is not necessarily offering solutions. She's just saying, well...
This is the struggle.
This is the struggle, exactly. There were a couple of panels in here I wanted to ask you about, because there were a few that confused me. One is on the bottom of page 5 of this story, so it's page 15 in the book. We get a security camera that's looking at a bunch of people in a mall or something, people walking around, and everybody's word balloon has GI2, GI3, GI4. That's all it says is GI number 2, GI number 3, GI number 4. It's the bottom right corner of this page. Yep. And some of the balloons are circles, some are square. The surveillance camera has an exclamation point, and one person's thoughts are not GIs, but a bunch of
gears, weird
abstract objects. Yeah, it could be gears, but some of it looks like art or something. What did you? I didn't know if some of this was like French in-jokes about French comics that I didn't know, or what I was supposed to make of this, what the GIs were.
They're all identified by that's their serial number.
Oh.
All of them they're all wearing it on their uniforms.
Oh, you're right. Of course, yes.
And one of them is capable of abstract thought.
Ah, okay.
So they're all essentially, their identity is their number, and that's their sole concern. And then there's that one individual who is an individual who's thinking out of step with the others. It's a beautiful little panel.
Yeah.
I'd love that.
Yeah. Another panel I wanted to point out, which I kind of got, was when it's when he's investigating, he's searching the computer for data about Angie. Let me try to find this page. And he's talking to this weird... The interface is like this weird kind of Marilyn Monroe-looking hologram thing. And
that's when I started thinking of Mobius, actually. That's when I started, because I remember Mobius would do the whole, again, in Lankal, you got the whole coochie-coo, that sort of figure.
So this is on page 41 of the book, or 31 of the comic. We zoom in on this Marilyn figure until we're at a close-up of her cleavage in this triangle cutout of her top. And it's such a bizarre image
It's interesting.
It's so not. If out of context, it's so you wouldn't know what it was. It's so nonsensical.
She's challenging him to provide his access code.
Yes.
Yeah. It's weirdly sexual.
Is it? I don't know.
Is? Do you not think so?
I think it's so abstract. It seems like it should be in the middle panel because you're about to close in on her breast. By the last panel, you don't even know what you're looking at. It's a triangle with a little line in the middle, which we only know from previous panels is the cleavage of her breast. It's so weird and strange, and it's such a bizarre, interesting choice.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know quite what to make of it. But there were a few like that I was like, is she riffing on some other artist that I don't know about or something? And I do really like the last panel, the very last page when they're thinking about their child in the future and him teaching her about computer programs. And it's actually a thought balloon that's shared between the two of them. It's not like a spoken dialogue. It's really strange, interesting choice. But she's laid it all out. There's like that false love of the city. That poster is there, and Professor Nimbus is there on either side of this baby. Meanwhile, you've got like a number for the sector that they're in, which is a thing that comes up again and again, is people having numbers, as you just mentioned about the GI. A lot of these stories have people being assigned numbers.
Yep.
So it's all kind of here in this last page, and it's really uncertain, but not as uncertain as the next story. But was there anything else you wanted to add about this one?
No, I think I got in my points about, like, I just really wanted to mention you touched on the ineptitude line. I just find it delightful. So funny. And we talked about the dream sequence, but the sort of womb-like walls.
Yes.
The birth canal, she's walking through it all. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
The talking cats.
There was definitely some French in jokes there because they were talking about like musicians and stuff, and there was some cat puns.
As well. They were talking about some post, Natalie Sarraute, French literature. There's interesting little nods here and there. Yeah.
So that story's about 50 pages. So now we get another story which is about 50 pages called Shelter. Apparently these are in reverse chronological order. So the 1996 stories were first. Am I getting that right? And then and then Shelter was next. And then the one we just talked about, Wonder City, was the last one, but that had never been released in English before, whereas Shelter at least partially was. So there's a bit of a change in art style I noticed between all of these. This one's got a much thicker line and more solid blacks throughout, and it doesn't go for that single color effect that Wonder City did. But do you want to talk about the plot for this one a bit?
Actually, I'll throw to you for this one, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I'll leave it to you.
Okay, so in the previous story we had a guy who was working for the government doing this genetic coding, and this woman who was a musician. And there's a scene in Wonder City where they get stopped by the police, and the police ask him, they're like, hey, you have a good job. Why are you with this woman? This one, we have a couple who seem to be very well off. They're wearing tuxedos and a nice evening gown. They're about to go to a presumably very fancy dinner party. There's some kind of combat happening on the news. There's, again, the threat of nuclear war. There's a curfew because of the conflict that's going on. We don't know what it is, besides the fragments we hear about it on the news. As they're leaving, she gets stopped by a patrol in the lobby of their apartment building. And she says they always stop women and foreigners. Mm-hmm. They're just abusing their power. So again, we've got a little bit of too much authority encroaching a police state. Not quite at that level, maybe, at this stage, but something like that is happening. So they decide they need to stop at the mall to buy a present of some wine for their hosts on the way to the party. The mall is about to close, but they go in, and they go all the way down, where apparently it's 100% secure from radiation at the bottom level where this mall is. And they go in there, and while they're there, the mall goes into automatic lockdown. The blast shields go down or whatever. They're locked in because apparently there's been supposedly been a nuclear blast or something has happened outside, and that's what would automatically cause the blast shields to come down and lock them in. But they have enough food and supplies supposedly to house 15,000 people for a year. But they've only got actually, I think, a few hundred in there that are locked in there at this point. And they say, look, announcement comes on from the mall manager. And he's like, look, so we've all got to live here. As soon as the radiation clears, we'll be able to go again. But while we're here, we've got to set up these kind of systems. Some people immediately start panicking. They're immediately sedated. And they immediately hand out number badges, which is the thing I mentioned before. And they're like, you got to keep your number so we know. So they call everyone to the auditorium. They're like, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be no more money. We're going to share all our food and stuff. Everybody does whatever job is best suited to them or what their interests are. And it seems like a kind of mini utopia initially. Now, of course, I'm immediately suspicious because I've been raised on this type of fiction for 40 years. But it seems like, and they say they're going to have food at set times in the food court. Everybody's going to be sleeping in the furniture store together. And they assign everyone jobs, and they say you got to keep your badges so we know what food you've taken and stuff like that, so everybody can share without any money. So the woman, her name is Teresa, and the husband is named Jean. She gets a job working in the bookstore, which she has to turn into a library. She says, I'll still be working around books. So she's in like publishing or something like that. So she's got a good job, whatever it was on the outside, or, a privileged job, let's call it. Jean, her husband, or Jean, was a school teacher, but he becomes an electrician. So maybe he was teaching electronics or something. We don't know. Communal living is working pretty well at this early stage. The girls are all chatting about it. They're like, oh, it's weird that I don't have to pay for things. I'm always looking for money in my pocket. And they're given clothing and all this stuff. And it seems to be all right. And someone even says it could be a recipe for happiness. But she starts loaning out books to the security personnel that come in. And they are not bringing them back. Like, they're supposed to bring back books in a week and re-sign them up. But they're just taking out books. And they're all political books or philosophy books. And then we learn that the movies that they're screening are starting to get canceled. So, like, the media, especially media about politics with ideas in it, is starting to disappear. And when this movie is canceled, people start arguing and fighting about it, and the regime starts cracking out. Security personnel come in, start beating people up. And as we progress, we get more announcements from the manager of the mall, who is now like the supreme commander of this organization. He's like, our survival experiment has now become a social experiment because we're still trapped in here. But look how great it's going. Like, everybody's sharing things. We've had a few problems with people who are protesting for whatever reason, but that's fine. They'll understand soon enough. And he makes an announcement that young women are now allowed to have babies if they're between the ages of 23 and 24, I think he says. And we also learn through dialogue that some people have had mandatory abortions. I'm guessing people that were not in that age range, or just in general, before this, there was no babies allowed. But now they're allowing babies for women in a certain age range. Teresa, because she's been around the books and sees what's happening at the books, is becoming suspicious of what's going on. And she says that our leadership is unknown and unelected. They're faceless. They're a big brother up there, and they didn't choose them. She's like, are we really okay with this? And she says the people are told they're happy, and they believe everything they're told, which is a theme we had in Wonder City, where the people were told that to be happy with Wonder City, and they're wearing badges that say, I love Wonder City, and they were upset when she vandalized the Nimbus booth. So it's a similar kind of thing here, where a lot of people are seemingly happy because they've been told they're happy. So because she's complaining, some people actually call security on her. She's gang raped by the security team in a shocking scene. She's brought before the police. They try to blame her. They say, were you being provocative? What were you wearing? All this stuff. She realizes she's not going to get through these guys. She just decides to drop it. We get another dream sequence here. So similarly. This time she dreams she's in a concentration camp, like a Nazi concentration camp where people are being starved. All the women are stripped naked and turned into sex slaves. They're put in these kind of this leather gear with their breasts exposed and their heads shaved, and then taken to service the officers. And she has a dream that's very similar to the actual gang rape she suffered. So then they're like a resistance is forming among some of the people. They print some leaflets. They're arrested. The government tries to recruit them. Interestingly, they refuse. They meet a guy when they're arrested who says that there was no nuclear bomb and it's all just a ruse and they're being trapped there on purpose. They, even after printing the leaflets and everything, they think he's totally paranoid to believe this. They're like, that guy was really off his rocker. But they decide they're going to try. She wants to try to escape in case this guy was right. She wants to see what's outside. So they go up. They secretly go up. They fight some guards on the way. Because he's an electrician, Jean is able to open some of the doors. And they get to the very top, and they're not able to open the last door. It's like there's concrete or something that's blocking them. They just can't get through. And she's horrified now because now at this level, they might be irradiated. They might have ruined their lives. And she even says, we could have been happy. Maybe we shouldn't have done this. But then in the final page, we get a kind of Twilight Zone twist where we do see a sign on the outside which says, on this site, 823 persons lost their lives following the explosion of an atomic battery that powered an underground shopping mall. So the story on the outside is that the people inside the mall were in an explosion and they've been killed. So it seems like maybe it was planned from day one. Like, maybe the mall manager volunteered for this job. You're going to set up this mini society. This is all a balloon trial to see if this thing is going to work. So they've locked down the mall. It's its own little world. But I did find it interesting that it's a kind of Pyrrhic victory. It actually reminded me of THX 1138, where he finally escapes, and then he's just on this weird red landscape at the end, and you don't know, like, what was the point of escaping for him? Because there's, like, nothing for him out there.
She specifically cites THX as an influence on her work.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's specifically something that just disgusted her and horrified her.
Yeah. So it's a bit like that, although we know that she hasn't been irradiated, but now what's her life going to be like now that they've tried to escape and beat up a bunch of guards? I mean, even if she's not irradiated, it's not going to be a good scene. So again, this one was familiar in structure, but I actually love this one too. A lot of things. I love the whole angle of the bookstore. I found it so interesting that we had like this kind of rich couple in here. And I really wondered what was going on. Was there a race angle in this one? Not as much. Except when she says that the patrols were bothering women and foreigners at the very start. We don't see anything like that in the mall itself, as I recall. But yeah, there were some twists on this that were new, and I did really love it for that. And I love the way she somehow delivers information in a very passing way through a piece of dialogue where somebody says, oh, we've had to have the mandatory abortions. There's not like a big scene about it. It's just throwaway stuff where you get all these details about what's going on in this world. And I was fooled for a minute because when they had the scene in the auditorium, I was like, oh, this is going to go bad. But then when everybody started talking in the bathroom scene where all the women are getting dressed, and they're like, this is actually working pretty well, and it could be a recipe for happiness. I was like, oh, maybe it is going to be okay. So I was fooled for a minute.
The bourgeois trap, in its essence. You know, if you just take care of people's entertainment and luxury, and they'll put up with any sort of violation of their personal freedoms. Yeah, this is powerful, very upsetting for me to read. That's why I passed the baton to you. I just, sexual assault again is something. It's very disturbing, obviously. But I think it's a powerful piece, and you give a good account of it as well. I think it's a really strong story, and the ending I love because it reminds me of there's an Australian movie from the 80s, Dead End Drive-In.
Okay.
Did you ever see that one?
No, I haven't seen it.
It's based on a Peter Carey novel, or short story, sorry. But yeah, it's about all these unemployed youths get sort of directed to this drive-in space, and then they're not allowed to leave.
Ah, okay.
And they're just trapped there. And race comes up in that as well. There is a sort of suggestion of simmering tensions being sort of directed towards different ethnicities, but a lot of the film is just these kids being sort of fed junk food and watching terrible movies and the drive-in cinemas, and then the violence is a release for them as well, and that's this will just keep them occupied, because society just can't create a future for them. So just take them, but it's specifically young people. But it's just take them all and put them in one place. I wonder if Carey read this, actually. I wouldn't be surprised if he had. Because it's such a specific analog almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's like, Wonder City and The Long Tomorrow, where it's just this is what's in the water at that stage and what people are thinking about. It kind of seems like that a bit to me.
More coming up. But first, a reminder to join us for 20th Century TV and music trivia quiz videos and more on our Patreon page. Patrons donating $4 a month or more get access to hours of additional podcasts. Get all the info at patreon.com/deconcomics.
You like cheap comic books, right? Well, I'm Professor Allen, and I talk about cheap comic books on the Quarterbin Podcast. In every episode, I'll dissect a single comic from my collection, as long as I paid no more than 25 cents for the issue. Forget about $4 new comics that you can read in 4 minutes, or crossover events that can cost $100 to collect. Join me in the Quarterbin, where even bad comics are a bargain, and good ones are a steal. The Quarterbin Podcast is part of the Relatively Geeky Podcast Network. Visit us at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search Relatively Geeky or Quarterbin Podcast in iTunes. I guarantee it'll be worth every penny.
So this one was earlier than Wonder City, but I did like the thicker line work and the solid blacks that I mentioned before. I found the art maybe it lulled me into a false sense of security as well, that the art wasn't as angular and harsh. You don't get any weirdo panels in this one, like the first one, like with the close-up of Marilyn Monroe's triangle. There's nothing really abstract like that in this one. I find it really interesting that she went to the long dream sequence twice, and both times they're packed with important information, which you don't really get. Oftentimes in a dream sequence in a work of fiction, it's like, I kind of going to skim this. There are a lot of crucial stuff happening in both of them. And I find it interesting that she places that much importance on the subconscious, because these are very tactile works about, there's a lot of plot, like physical plot things kind of happening in these stories. So that was an interesting balancing tactic, maybe. Sure. Okay. Did you want to add anything else about it?
No, okay. That's nice. I like what you're describing there. It reminds me of the acid trip sequence from V for Vendetta, where there's your one per episode, where the characters sort of makes all these connections by being at that place, and his mental state. He's open to these memories, and then in the film, it's just Stephen Ray gives this like quick speech about, I guess it just happened like this, and then
we talked about this on my other podcast, Comic Book Movie Oblivion, where he actually remembers things that he wasn't there for. He remembers scenes that weren't there and that he wasn't at, and he makes connections. Bizarre, yeah. Anyway, digression. So we'll go to 1996, which is the earliest of her stuff that was originally published in English, but she had been a cartoonist for several years before she started doing these stories. So a lot of these are just one-pagers, which are kind of some of the same themes that we've seen in the two stories following. But I guess these were earlier, so those would have been expansions of these themes. But again, social sadism is the best short description of these. I don't know if we want to really go through all of these completely. It's interesting to me that one of them, again, is about a musician, and people crowd around to hear this musician, so the police come in and start beating up the crowd that's formed.
Because it's a revolutionary act.
Yes. So
they're agitators.
Yeah, so that reminded me of the musician in the first one, which is a similar thing where people are crowding around her and trying to get her to play.
I quickly wanted to read something from one of them.
Yeah.
If you don't mind. And I was thinking about it before when you were mentioning about the refusal to give easy answers, like the revolutionary catharsis of a lot of fiction is that, and then the evil overlord was defeated and everything was fine. She doesn't do that. But there's this one story, Dear Collaborators, and it's chilling. So I just want to read it.
This is apparently the first one. According to the interview at the back, this is the first 1996 story she did.
It's amazing. Dear friends and dear collaborators, given that our factory must now close its doors and your movement did not succeed, for the common good, we kindly request that you step into the disintegration room. Thanks.
Yeah. And it's just all these poor workers are absolutely disheveled, downtrodden workers, and this voice is coming from a woman whose face she looks like a model that's giving this speech to them. Yeah. And they're just destroyed to the point of disintegrate yourselves.
Yeah.
Is the final word on it. Yeah, that one. But we should talk at length about So Fast and Their Shiny Metal Cars, which is as far as I'm concerned, the best story in the book.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's Ballardian as well. I was reading through it, and I was going, God, I wish she ever. I wish she would do something with a Ballard story, or a Dom DeLillo's Underworld, which this sort of has some points in contact with in terms of the sort of reification of trash, like rubbish becoming art. Yeah. This idea is sort of really beautifully done here. And then I was just doing some quick Googling on her, and she has adapted The Trial by Franz Kafka with David Zane Merowitz for Self-Made Hero. And I'm going, I need to own that. Because similar again, that idea of this sort of dark surrealism. Yeah. Absurdist realism.
Yeah. Because this thing just, it's not long, it's maybe 20 pages, but it just keeps piling on.
Yeah.
Thing after thing after thing happens, and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe all this stuff is happening, and you never know where it's going to go, and there's some shocking twists. I don't know how we can really talk about this without spoiling it too much, but so it's about this boxer, he's still a boxer. His name is Alfredo, and he's driving up to Canada, but he stops in New York. He needs to buy some fog lights because there's so much fog. I guess it might be environmental, it might be like climate change fog. But so he stops and talks to his friend, who I guess maybe was his old trainer or whatever. And we learned that he looks really white. Mm-hmm. He's Puerto Rican, but he looks really white. And white people are not allowed to fight in blood sports anymore, we learn. White citizens shall not participate in dangerous or demeaning sports. Law passed July 3, 1987. So I guess he can't fight. He's driving to Canada. I guess he can't fight in the States because he looks white. Seems to be the case.
Well, he would have passed beforehand, and now I'm sure they're IDing the performers before they're allowed into the ring.
Yeah.
So he's not able to get through that system, but he can still perform in Canada.
Right.
As a fighter.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's forgotten his wallet, which is a reason he stopped in to see his friend. Because he needs to borrow money to buy these fog lights. Now, all these little plot details actually come up later, which is the interesting thing about it. So then he goes to this place he saw on the way, which is a place called Bell Rec, which I guess must be a play on Bell, the French for good, like a good wreck, which is a showroom which is several stories. It's like a department store almost of wrecks, and this is where we have these women that are half naked, wearing suspenders that are just like strategically placed over their nipples, and they seem to have this kind of come hither look when they invite the guests, or maybe that's just male gaze. Maybe that's his interpretation of what he's seeing there. But there's some interesting panels like where you just see the woman's face and there's no dialogue, as if she's kind of giving him bedroom eyes. Anyway, she's like, okay, we'll come down to like level B2 or whatever, and you can look at the wreck. So what they've got there is they've got whole cars, and you can just choose bits and pieces of them. She takes them down to the level where the backs of cars have been smashed. And she says, okay, have a look around and look for fog lights. And then he sees a corpse in a car, and he's shocked by it. He's like, what the hell is this? And she's like, no, that's there on purpose. So they embalm these corpses of the owners and leave them in the car. It helps to sell the cars, apparently, and also seems to be a form of art. Like, this is kind of a gallery. Like, we have these embalmed corpses down here.
Yeah.
So then she's like, okay, I found some fog lamps I like. And she's like, great, what's your name? And he gives his name, and it's Alfredo something. And she's like, what? I thought you were white. And he's like, no, I'm Puerto Rican. She's like, sorry, we're on the wrong floor. Didn't you see the sign at the entrance? He's like, I didn't see the sign. And she's like, I knew that sign should have been bigger. Okay.
Do we see the sign?
No, we don't get to see the sign either. I'm pretty sure. I read this twice.
We see lots of signs where you've got these, as you said, the models, lots of models, beautiful nubile bodies draped over wrecked cars, lots of sexually charged sort of. This is where Ballard comes in a big way. Like, this is Crash, all over. You know, it's like, I really hope that there's some sort of connection there. But yeah, so I was looking for some sort of signage after this moment. Not that it's a surprising moment, because it's been a continual theme throughout all our work.
Yes. So she's like, well, we got to go down 3 more levels, right? And he's like, what? Like, I don't want to go down to the basement. She says, down in the basement, or... Oh, yeah, she does. Do they go down there? So she's like, down there, they don't embalm them. They, what's the word? They taxidermy.
They stuff them.
They taxidermy. Yeah, they stuff them. Yeah. The poor people. And also they put more than one in a car. So she says it's like they lived in real life.
Yeah. It's this idea, and it comes up in Wonder City too, because Angie's criminality is seen to be, well, it's because of her race.
Yeah.
And again, you've got that idea of, no, they're just born criminals. That's what they are. So part of this, and this sort of specter that keeps coming up, is one of the main concerns on the political right in most of the 20th century was this idea of overpopulation. And it was all about the people from the southern equator, south of the equator nations, all these people of color, they're going to outbreed us all, and the white race is being replaced, and this is now coming back in a big way in the sort of fascist right that we're currently seeing evolve, and she's commenting on that here. So this is again one of the reasons for that comment from the salesperson, which is that, they're all packed into these cars together as they were in life.
Yes.
You know, like, and that's how they see people of color. They see them as, they're all just in each other's space all the time, not like these refined people. And I love the idea, the image of the rich people, the white corpses, which are, again, by the terms of the society, of greater value, having a car to themselves. And even in the instance where we learned there was an entire family that died in a wreck and were preserved in this sort of, art piece, they got snapped up by a gallery.
Yeah.
Because it was like, what a beautiful piece.
Yeah.
So they're art.
Yeah.
Whereas the people in the sub basement, well, we're literally stuffing their corpses into the cars because it's actually cheaper than burying them.
Yeah.
They don't even have that dignity. They're being stuffed into the cars.
Yeah. Yeah. So Alfredo is horrified by this. So he decides to leave without buying his fog lamps. So I won't spoil the rest of it. It's really amazing, but let's just say he doesn't buy the fog lamps. So that's a clue. And then you think you know how it's going to end. You think it's going to have like this, okay, that's the ending. No, it just keeps going, and more government ridiculousness keeps happening.
Yeah, the incompetence comes up again.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just this, like, they have total control, and this is what they do.
Yeah, it's bureaucratic incompetence, I think, because of the... Yeah. I really had a sense, because it kept coming up, and despite these stories being set in the U.S., that the racing was really partially about French colonialism and France trying to come to terms with its treatment of Africa by the 1970s, when a lot of immigration was happening into France from those countries that had been colonies. I guess maybe that's where this was coming from, and I'm guessing that Montellier had a more empathetic take on these people that were flooding into France than what was, I'm guessing, what the media was saying about it was happening. I don't know. That's just just because it was so repeated, I really felt like this is what she's trying to get at. I felt.
Yeah, well, France, a sort of more accelerated pace than England, is seeing their empire collapse.
Yeah.
And a lot of the peoples that they've invaded and colonized are then coming to France to live and work and raise families. And there are political movements within France at that time, and still to this day, which see this as a disgrace. This is terrible. This is really, this is really bad. And you see the same thing in the UK.
Yeah.
And the UK, I find fascinating the UK for having this control over how it sees itself, which apparently was so profound that you've got the likes of Morrissey and John Cleese and so going on a day trip to London, realizing there's black people running around. This is recently.
Yeah.
Within the last 5 to 10 years. This is recently. John Cleese is going, I can't believe there's so many Arabians, and I find that France was dealing with that decades earlier.
Yeah.
Although 1980s UK still, like, this is, again, I'll bring up V for Vendetta again. That is one of Alan Moore's fears in that book, is that in the event of a complete fascist takeover of the UK, entire sectors of the population will just be genocided and will literally be erased from the record. That is one of the things that happens in V for Vendetta. So I see a similar sort of theme with Chantal. She's talking about population control. She's talking about sterilization. She's talking about forced segregation of the races in every aspect of life, even in death. And that in death, the white race gets treated with this respect to the point of their corpse car becomes an art object.
Yeah.
And the people of color are then just shoved into metal cages and then locked in the sub-basement. Or we see drop down a chute.
Yeah.
But it's this recurring right-wing sort of fear about overpopulation. And I think that's, it's very, I love that she's come at it from this angle. Like she wrote for Le Combat Syndicaliste, Révolution Maintenant, Le Journal, all these sort of socialist, anarcho-leaning journals as an illustrator. So I can. It's in her. It's the warp and weave of her work. It's all there.
Yeah.
Thank you for suggesting we read this, man. Like,
this is my wheelhouse right here. This is like science fiction comics that are really smart. But this story especially, I mean, as I said with the other two, there's kind of a familiar structure to them, where we've kind of seen this stuff because it was happening at the same time. But I don't, except for Ballard, which you mentioned, even then, I don't think I've read anything that had a plot that unfolded the way the Shiny Metal Cars story does. That alone was worth the ticket price for entry, I think. And even reading it the second time, there was like bits I had forgotten and shocked me all over again. It's really audacious, that one. The interview in the back is really great as well, with some funny bits. She's really hard-edged, sharp, funny. And it was... I found that reading it even without any context, which you'd think you'd need for something that was, 40 years old, would diminish the experience. But I don't know. I don't feel like I missed anything except for some of those weirdo panels in Wonder City. I just wanted to mention there's this one story. There's a story called... it's one of these 1996 ones called CX1341, which is very much like a THX title. Yeah. So again, it's about a numbered person. It's about surveillance. This guy's trying to smoke a cigarette. There's a camera on him, and he ducks into a little alcove or a doorway to light his cigarette. And the guy on the surveillance camera loses sight of him, and he announces over the microphone, CX1341, return to the field of view. So the guy steps back out and then cries, fuck, I guess because his cigarette went out in the wind.
Yeah.
Is my guess. But I love this covers all of it. So we've got the numbering, we've got the surveillance, we've got the ineptitude of the surveillance guy who has to request his subject to come back out into the field of view of the camera.
Do you know what I think is going on here?
What do you think?
The guy monitoring him, his monitor, to me...
Yeah.
Absent spectacles, though, looks just like Michel Foucault.
Oh, right.
And Michel Foucault wrote about the panopticon in Discipline and Punish. And he was sort of the great hero of the resurgent philosophical left at the time. And then he would become the great hero of the American centrist, Californian corporate liberal in the 80s. He would sort of turn on a lot of those principles, I'd say. But yeah, I think that's Foucault. I think that's a little piss take of the panopticon idea.
Okay, any final thoughts or any other quick ones that you wanted to have a look at in 96?
No, I freaking love this.
Yeah. It was really, really special. I'm glad we got it. Very interesting. Apparently, so they've got she's had a lot of books out, and this is the one that New York Review Comics decided to put out for whatever reason, a really early one. Maybe it's more accessible. I don't know, but I certainly hope we get some more in English if this is successful.
Well, yeah, as I mentioned, that Self-Made Hero edition of the trial. Yeah. I'm going to get that now. But also, like, her work is so detailed. I went to her website, and there's some individual prints that I'd love to get as well. Like, she's just great artist, and there's a lot of humor as well as some of the sort of sadness at play here. So, I'm so happy you introduced me to her, and yeah, it's just a fantastic talent.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent.
Chantal Montellier's social fiction is published by New York Review Comics. Emmet has recently had an essay included in the book Waxing and Waning, Essays on Moon Knight, published by Sequart. Kumar is the co-host of the podcast Comic Book Movie Oblivion, about relatively obscure movies based on comics. If you're enjoying our comics discussion every week, consider supporting this podcast by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics, and go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on what used to be Twitter, on Facebook, where we have both a page and a group, or on YouTube. Via our site, you can also shop on Amazon to support the show and find links to subscribe to the podcast. You can comment on any episode there or drop us a line at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. That's also the address for submitting your own comics work for possible inclusion on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. Next week, Kumar and Dana discuss Daniel Close's latest graphic novel, Monica. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.